Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. We are just about to head over to the MSI HQ to check out their new monitors for Computex 2026. I believe they've got some pretty interesting stuff on show. I think they've got the world's first 32-inch 4K QD-OLED monitor at 360 Hz with triple mode support. So hopefully they've got that model on show and we can take a look at it, see how it works. We've also got a new generation of 27-inch 1440p QD-OLED panel at 320 Hz with some new functionality and features that we'll also be able to take a look at, plus some other monitors, as MSI usually has quite a range on show at Computex. So let's head over to the MSI HQ after this.
Our 2026 Computex coverage is brought to you by MSI and their GeForce RTX 50 series graphics cards, including flagship models like the Supreme Liquid and Vanguard, both of which delivered class-leading results in our testing. Powered by NVIDIA's Blackwell architecture, RTX 50 series GPUs are the ultimate way to experience ray tracing, delivering more realistic lighting and visual fidelity than ever before. You'll also benefit from AI-powered DLSS 4.5 frame generation and NVIDIA Reflex for smoother, more responsive gameplay. So for more information on MSI's GeForce RTX 50 series of graphics cards, please check the links in the video description. Finally, a big thank you to G.Skill for helping make our Computex trip possible this year. G.Skill offers an outstanding range of DDR5 memory with AMD Expo support, designed to maximize AMD Ryzen performance. So for more information, please check the links in the video description.
So I think this is the MSI monitor that most people are interested in from their Computex announcements. This one created a ton of buzz, and we're here to, I guess, sort of have a look at it. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but this is the MPG OLED 322 URD X36. So this is the new triple mode 4K monitor using a QD OLED panel, the new fifth generation QD OLED with pentatandem. So many generations, hard to keep track of. So the interesting thing about this specific model that we're looking at here is that this is very much a prototype version. It's so much of a prototype actually that to even show the front on camera right now was a little difficult. We had to convince MSI to do so because the triple mode panel isn't actually in this version just yet. This panel is far enough away in the future that MSI do not have the hardware on hand just yet. The main thing that they are showing off with this particular model is, I guess, the industrial design, the new design changes that we'll show on the back in some of the B-roll. But so while they are showing us this monitor here, the final version of the panel will be put into the final production models later, and we'll potentially be seeing that at CES next year. But just so that people are aware, we're not able to film this panel close up. We can't show you anything related to whether this is an actual RGB stripe panel or anything, because again, like I said, it's not the final panel, but we're able to show you the marketing information here on screen for you. So this is a really exciting panel in my opinion. This is the flagship highest end version of Samsung's 32-inch 4K display that they're making. Essentially what the MSI version is going to give you is the triple mode design. So I think this is really innovative and cool because we've seen dual mode monitors before, right? So previously, if you had a 4K dual mode monitor, you get 4K at some high refresh rate, then they take you down to 1080p at 480 Hz. Now 1080p on a 32-inch screen, it's not amazing. It's definitely usable. A lot of those monitors gave you a higher refresh rate, but it's not the greatest for text quality and that sort of thing. With triple mode, you're getting 4K at 360 Hz, so a much higher refresh rate than previous 4K monitors that were 240 Hz, but they're also giving you a 1440p 520 Hz mode and a 1080p 680 Hz mode. So massively high refresh rate for the 1080p mode. That's going to be ideal for esports gaming. But I think for a lot of people that want that higher refresh rate mode, this midpoint 1440p mode is going to be ideal. Now, of course, it's not going to be able to use integer scaling because it's a native 4K panel. So there is going to be some scaling used to achieve the 1440p resolution output. And unfortunately, again, because again, this is a demo model without the final panel, we're not able to see how that scaling would look. We're not able to demo the triple mode or anything because it's just not a functional version just yet. Maybe we will see that at Samsung display as opposed to MSI here. But yeah, I'm super keen to check out that triple mode functionality because yeah, 1440p 500 Hz is going to be great for a lot of gaming where 1080p is just not going to have the resolution. There's a lot of other improvements that have been made to this panel. So first of all, display HDR True Black 600 spec, so up from True Black 400 and 500 on the previous 32-inch 4K models. What that means, they tell me, is a 600 nit 10% window size, full screen brightness, potentially in that 300 to 350 nit range. We weren't able to get final confirmation on those numbers just yet because again, the panel isn't in for testing at the moment. And peak of 1500 nits. So the first generation models that MSI made for the 32-inch 4K panels, those went up to 1000 nits. This new flagship version will go up to 1500 nits, still with the adjustable HDR functionality. In addition, we get the RGB stripe sub-pixel layout. So that was first debuted on the 34-inch ultra-wides at 3440 by 1440. Samsung Display are also bringing this to the 32-inch 4K panel with this 5th generation QD OLED that MSI are using, plus all the high-end features that you would expect, things like the AI Care sensor that we've tested before, DisplayPort 2.1 UHBR20, and dark armor with the 3H coating. So the same as the refreshed 32-inch 4K models in early 2026. In terms of timing and release date for this model, because again, we're sort of just looking at a prototype without the final panel, it is a little way off. The monitor representative that I was talking to suggested perhaps the first quarter of 2027 for release date of this one, which means we probably will see the final version at CES next year, early next year. And of course, no pricing just yet because it does seem to be quite far off. So yeah, if you were sort of hoping to get one this year, unfortunately, I don't think you'll be able to, but it should still be available within the next year or so. Unlike sometimes, because sometimes at Computex we come and see monitors and they're like 18 months, 24 months away. But with this particular monitor, it does seem like it's not that far away, but still a little bit into the distance. Another thing that I really like about this particular monitor is the new design that MSI are going with. They've got this really cool hologram effect on the back, along with the nice flat metal stand, which is a trend that I'm really liking in modern monitors. So I think the upgraded design looks really, really nice. Certainly an upgrade on the previous high-end MPG and MEG designs that MSI was using previously, even though this isn't actually an MEG model. So yeah, that's quite nice. So again, not really able to tell you too much more about like what it's like to use this particular monitor because the panel isn't functional just yet, but we'll get to all that testing when we can, of course. So the other monitors that we're seeing here from MSI at Computex, they're coming out much sooner. Some of them have pricing, some of them have more firm release dates. So we're going to check out some other cool options from MSI right here at the show. So here we have MSI's MAG271QP X32, which is the new version of the 1440p 27-inch panel that Samsung Display are providing. So we've seen lots of variants of this specific, I guess, panel setup with 27 inches 1440p. They've offered 240 Hz, they've offered 280 Hz, 360 Hz, 500 Hz, various different specs. This is an entirely new specification. So first of all, 320 Hz, so completely different refresh rate to what they've been offering, I guess that midpoint between 280 and 360 Hz. But this particular monitor is coming with a lot of other upgrades as well, which is probably going to make it a more attractive option for people after that sort of mid to high end 1440p QD OLED. So firstly, this is using the latest Penta-Tandem 4th generation QD OLED technology. So 5-layer emissive structure, quite different. Well, I shouldn't say quite different, it's slightly different to the emissive design that we got from the 240, 280 and 360 Hz version. So it is a newer generation of Samsung Display's technology. They say that it boosts light efficiency by up to 30%. So that's a nice benefit as well. This also is increasing the brightness spec from True Black 400 to True Black 500, and with the peak spec up from 1000 nits to 1300 nits. So we should be seeing much higher peak brightness and also higher full screen brightness, similar to what we saw from the ultra wide 360 Hz V-Stripe models that we reviewed earlier in the year. MSI has one of those. They tell me the brightness of this particular model should be very similar to the brightness spec of those ultra wides. And it should also actually be slightly brighter than the 500 Hz models, which were True Black 500, but not peak 1300 nits. So yeah, this should offer the best brightness that we've seen from this sort of 27-inch 1440p QD OLED category. They also tell me this is the new dark armor coating, so reduced ambient light reflection and that sort of thing. We've seen some of those benefits again from some of the monitors that we reviewed earlier this year, the 32 inches and the 34-inch models, the 3H coating as well. It is still, though, using what MSI told me is called the Q-square sub-pixel layout. I used to call it triangle RGB, but essentially this is not the, I guess, RGB stripe, V-stripe layout that we saw from the 34-inch model. So it's not quite the same as that ultra-wide. A lot of the specs sort of indicate that it might be, but the sub-pixel layout from Samsung Display, they're still using the same one from before. So that's probably the only maybe negative to this panel. Well, it's not necessarily a negative because it's the same as all the other models. It hasn't been upgraded just yet, which is probably going to be disappointing for some people. You can see a lot of the other specs here on the screen are sort of the things that we've seen previously from QD OLED monitors. Now, they tell me this monitor is probably coming towards the end of this year, around the Q4 time, with no confirmed pricing just yet. However, we've seen from MSI's lineup that they're continuing to sell the 500 hertz models at around $750 US, and then they've got 240 hertz models more around the sort of $400 to $500 range. So I'm going to guess this model is going to be around $600 US. They wouldn't necessarily confirm that when I suggested it to them when I was talking to them, but I expect it to be around that sort of price. And there are some small design changes that you'll probably see in some of the B-roll. What we also found here from talking to MSI relating to this model is about MSI's lineup. So basically with the 1440p models that we'll be seeing throughout this year in the 27-inch size, there will be the 500 hertz models continuing to be sold. There will be the 320 hertz new model that we're seeing here available for sort of the mid to high end buyers. And then for mainstream gamers, you'll see those new 240 hertz models, which have the lower peak brightness spec, no peak 1000 mode. They're just around that 400 nit range. In some markets, you might continue to see the 240 hertz ones with 1000 nits of brightness and the 280 hertz models. But my understanding is they're trying to encourage people who are interested in those 240 hertz, 1000 nits type of models to go for this 320 hertz model instead. So that's going to be MSI's lineup for 1440p QD OLEDs throughout the rest of the year. And yeah, I'm pretty keen to check out how the improvements go when we get to testing it a bit later on. So throughout Computex, you're probably going to see tons of new QD OLED variants. It seems like Samsung Display are just creating absolutely everything at the moment. And one of those we're seeing here with the MSI MAG 321 UPX18. So this is a 32-inch 4K QD OLED. We've seen this panel before. However, this is a new variant of that at 180 hertz with some changes to the brightness spec. So a lot of the 32-inch 4K models that we've seen so far have offered up to peak 1000 nits. So we would have, in fact, pretty much all of the monitors that we've tested have offered that 1000 nit spec, not this particular monitor, which they say only has the it is Display HDR True Black 400 certified, so they've managed to meet that specification. However, there's no peak 1000 mode, brightness doesn't go that high. They're telling me peak brightness caps out at about 400 nits. So this is quite interesting because we've seen, again, those 1440p 240 hertz models come out without the peak 1000 spec, but they're also without the True Black spec. So this monitor meets True Black 400, but doesn't give you peak 1000. So again, so many different options, so many different variants. It's all very confusing, the specs that are offered, but essentially this is designed to be a lower cost 4K QD OLED for people. So the interesting things about this monitor that we've seen is that MSI have sort of picked and choosed, or maybe Samsung Display, depending on what panels they're offered, they've picked and choose some of the technologies that Samsung Display offer in their QD OLED panel. So this is a pentatandem 4th generation QD OLED panel. So it's using the new emissive layer, which is great. It is also offering the 3H hardness, so a bit more scratch resistant, bit easier to clean from that sense, but they are not offering dark armor. So normally we have seen all of those things combined, pentatandem, dark armor, and 3H all together into the one. This is giving you a couple of those benefits, but the ambient light reflectivity should be pretty similar to the first generation versions of this model. So if you wanted dark armor tech, I believe MSI offer a sort of higher end 32-inch 4K model. This won't be offering that particular feature. But yeah, the rest of the specs here should be very similar to what we've seen from other QD OLEDs in this size before. The customizable HDR mode is offered, which is always nice. So particularly with the HDR mode only going up to 400 nits, you'll be able to customize the roll off a bit. So if you don't want harsh brightness clipping because of the lower peak brightness, you'll be able to adjust that a little bit via MSI's mode, which is always quite nice. They also tell me this monitor will be available probably towards the end of this year in Q4. Again, no pricing is confirmed just yet, but again, considering the spec and the range of MSI monitors, they typically offer 32-inch 4K 240 hertz with the full brightness spec around $800 US. So I would think this monitor will come in a little bit under that, but we'll have to wait and see how things go towards the end of the year. Yeah, not much else to say on this one. Let's go check out some more monitors. So this is a monitor that we first saw at CES, but it's back here at Computex, and I thought it's probably worth a bit of a refresher considering it's edging a little closer to release. This is the MPG271K RAW 18, so it's a 5K monitor with dual mode, 180 Hz and 1440p 330 Hz, 2304 mini LED zones in this one. Now, back at CES, MSI hadn't confirmed whether they would actually be releasing this model or not. It seemed up in the air as to whether they were going to put it into mass production. They tell me now that this is confirmed to be released and is likely coming in the fourth quarter of this year at a price around $800 US. That's not final pricing, but should be around that mark, which does make it much cheaper than the LG monitor that we're just about to test that also is 5K dual mode with mini LED. MSI tell me that this uses a different panel. It has, of course, a glossy finish. It goes up to display HDR 1400. So both of those specs are different to the LG model. I can't talk too much more about the panel differences, but there are some more significant differences that we'll be able to go into in the review between those two models. So it sounds like there are some different 5K dual mode options available for monitor manufacturers to use. But this is a similar monitor to what we saw at CES 2026. There has been a small spec increase for this particular panel. At CES, it was 5K 165 Hz. It's now been bumped up to 5K 180 Hz. They've also changed the name from X16 to X18 to reflect that change. But aside from that, this is pretty much the same display that we saw back at that show. And we'll hopefully take a look at this as soon as it's available. So we saw this monitor at CES and it's making a comeback here at Computex. It is the MSI MAG271 KPD7. This is using one of the new 27-inch 5K panels, but this was the interesting dual mode version where the 5K mode runs at 75 Hz, designed more for productivity users, and then the dual mode runs at 1440p 300 Hz. So they're really pumping it up. You can see they call this the 4x refresh rate boost. Yeah, pretty crazy on that thing. We haven't seen too many more details about this monitor here. Maybe we'll be able to get a bit more information later in the show, but essentially, yeah, we're seeing this 4K monitor again. Just wanted to touch on it briefly because you might have missed our CES coverage, but there are a lot of these new 5K dual mode monitors that are coming to market. MSI also has one with a higher refresh rate with mini LED that we'll probably check out, or maybe we've already checked out in this video, depending on the order that we put things in. But yeah, I'm pretty keen to check out, maybe not necessarily the 75 Hz model, but certainly the higher refresh rate model. The success of this particular panel will really depend on its pricing. If this is quite affordable because of its sort of lower 5K refresh rate, it could make sense. But we're starting to see some of those 5K monitors with the higher refresh rate debut. It's sort of that, $700-ish price range. So if this is undercutting it, it could be a good option for people that, use productivity tasks in 5K and they just game at 1440p 300 Hz. So yeah. Let's get to another monitor.
Also supporting our Computex coverage is Be Quiet and their excellent new range for 2026. Some of their latest offerings include power supplies like the Dark Power 6, AIOs such as the Pure Loop 3, additions to the light base lineup, and a great selection of peripherals. Be Quiet's entire range is German designed, enjoying excellent build quality and silent performance. So for more information, please check the links in the video description.
As part of MSI's Pro Max series, I've found another Samsung Display QD-OLED panel format that they're manufacturing. Here we have the 34-inch 3440 by 1440 QD-OLED that we've seen for a while now. This is using the new 5th gen QD-OLED panel, pentatandem, RGB stripe layout, all that sort of usual stuff. But this monitor, as you might have seen here, is actually flat. So apparently, for pro users, you can buy a model which isn't curved, which is going to reduce distortions and stuff if you're using it for side-by-side applications. I tend to think the curve that they use, 1800R for a lot of the gaming monitors, isn't too bad for productivity use. It's obviously designed mostly for gaming, but for productivity use, if you really do want to be doing things like editing videos or editing photos, you don't want distortions that a curve can introduce. So on at least a 34-inch size, I think the flat panel does make sense. I have heard from some other manufacturers that they're thinking of producing like 49-inch panels that are flat, like super ultra-wide format. Don't know how successful that would be, but I think the 34-inch format makes a bit more sense. This version comes with, I believe, a 144 Hz refresh rate. So it isn't the full 360 Hz that the gaming models provide, but it's largely the same panel otherwise. So things like the dark armor film, 3H coding, that sort of thing. And there's all the sorts of stuff you'd expect from a Pro Max monitor from MSI. So lots of connectivity, HDMI, DisplayPort, USB-C with power delivery, so you can hook it up to laptops and all that sort of thing. So yeah, it's quite an interesting product from just, I walked into this room and I'm like, oh, is that a flat QD OLED with the 34-inch size? And it was. So I thought it's probably worth covering in this video. So I walked into this room here at MSI and was just chatting about some of the monitors that they were showing. And I noticed the Pro Max 271 UPX12G and I thought, I'm pretty sure I've seen this monitor at CES, but in a white version. So obviously, if you see a monitor that's just swapped in color, it's not that exciting, not something you really talk about in the channel too much. And then I got chatting to the monitor PM who was in charge of this particular display. And it turns out that while the naming is very similar, I think the monitor that we looked at CES is the 271 UPX W12G. This is the non-W model. Despite the fact that it's largely the same product name, it's actually a different monitor in terms of its hardware spec. So the white model is the flagship model that includes things like a KVM. I think they put a 3-way KVM switch in it. It's got more ports, so you get more USB-Cs and stuff like that. It's got the AI care sensor on it. This black model, for whatever reason, is also a slightly downgraded spec. There's no AI care sensor, there's no KVM switch at all, and I believe there's only one Type-C port on it. Still at 98 watts of power delivery, which is still good for, you know, a productivity-focused monitor that you'd hook up to laptops. But I just thought it was interesting that in this specific version, at least, it's not just a color swap from white to black like I was expecting, and that for these sorts of monitors, you do still need to look into the specs to make sure that it's the same between the two different color versions. Aside from this is just your usual 27-inch QD OLED, 4K spec, 120 Hz. This is I think it's got a matte screen coating on it, designed for productivity use cases. So if you want more information on this, we did cover the white version at CES, so you can check back our coverage of that particular one from that show. All right, and that does it for MSI's Computex 2026 gaming monitors. I guess, a little disappointing to see that MSI didn't have the actual 32-inch 4K 360 Hz model on show, and it was just a demo/dummy unit to more show off the design and the actual panel capabilities. But as we sort of said in the video, it is coming in the first quarter of 2027, so it's still a fair way off, and hopefully we'll be able to see that actual panel working in action at some point in the future. And yeah, a couple of other interesting panels and updates from some of the things that we've seen from MSI previously. So yeah, lots of good stuff to look forward to throughout the rest of 2026 from MSI's monitor lineup. We are also going to go and check out a bunch of other companies here at the show, so you should expect coverage of things from Asus, Dell, and a couple of the other companies as we go through all of their various different booths. So stay tuned to Monitors Unboxed for more monitor content, more latest updates, news, all that sort of thing right here from Taipei. So yeah, that pretty much does it for this one. Thanks for joining us, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one.